Good afternoon. The Committee of the Whole is back on order. We currently don't have a quorum. It's currently only 7 of us, and we'll recess until a sufficient number of colleagues show up. There's only 7 of us. All right? Thank you. We're back to recess. They should be here soon. We start at 2.
I'm here.
Okay? Thank you. Good afternoon, colleagues. The Committee of the Whole is back in order. My colleagues, we will begin this afternoon with the budget, Bill 282-35 LS, as substituted by the Committee on General Government, Operation, Appropriation, and Housing. The rules of engagement. My colleagues, you'll find on their second reading on your file the rules of engagement. Questions for the panel will be asked in 2 rounds. 5-minute time limit for questions per senator per round. Please understand, if you ask a question, that's the only time that is measured. The answer is not measured. The time for the answer is not measured. Okay? There's no limit on the number of questions, but you got 5-minute time limit for questions. I hope everybody understands that. In other words, your question should be only 10 seconds, then you got 20 minutes of an answer. Okay, we'll move on. Amendments must be submitted via email to the clerk and legal counsel before the motion to amend is made on the floor. Please be mindful that some of your amendments may have some legal implications. Please coordinate that with legal. Amendments will rule out of order if it is not submitted prior to the proffering. All right? I hope everybody understands that. Amendments. If you're submitting an amendment, Senator Kelly, just the 2 rounds. If we're on chapter 1, then we got 2 rounds on chapter 1. Yes, we're going to go by chapter. We're going. Yeah. Well, I think if we go by page, reminder. Okay, let's move along. Senators who wish to increase an appropriation to any agency or department must identify the funding source and provide explanation of the impacts to both the receiving agency and or the defunded agency. One thing I failed to add was, or any change in revenue. That's the only thing that's not on your website right now. Or any change in revenue. In other words, if you want to reduce the total appropriation, it has to be stated, and then we have to identify what agencies are impacted. If we're going to increase the appropriation from this budget act, this budget bill, then we have to identify that across and identify the agencies that will benefit from it or be decreased. All right? Okay, thank you. Reminder, my colleagues, by Guam Code Title 2, Chapter 2, 2109, the annual fiscal year budget for the government of Guam shall be passed by the legislature and submitted to Magahaga no later than August 31st. We got until August 31st. It's only August 11th. Let's use our time wisely. We will now begin on Chapter 1.
Mr. Chair?
At our amendments, but we can begin
Mr. Chair?
if we're going to begin any questions. We have, I think, Chapter 1, we have Senator
Mr. Chair?
Morgan. I'm looking at you got a lot of amendments there, Senator Morgan. We're going to go by page. Are there any objection? Are we okay at page 1 then? There's a request that we just go page by page. Page 1 only has the introduction. That's only the title. We haven't got to any number. Page 2 is where we got the dollar numbers. Any objection to page 1?
Mr. Chair? Mr. Chair?
Well, we're going to go only for the purpose of the beginning. We're going to have to go page for page because in each page they've got dollar amounts. Once we get to the next chapter, we're already in an agency. Then it'll be a lot quicker. This one is the most timely one because it identifies all the appropriation. Once we adopt the total appropriation, there's no change. we're set, we move forward. He's trying to get my attention? What's that?
Mr. Chair,
Are
can
we
you hear
have any
me?
objection on page
This is
one?
Lester.
Let's start with page one. Lester, when we need to ask him a question, we'll.
Sir, can you hear me?
He's on mute? He's on mute. He wants to talk?
Yes.
Can we turn on Mr.
Brian?
Carlson? Lester, can you hear me?
I can hear you, sir. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. We're on page one of the Budget Act.
Yes. Thank you, sir. I would like to draw the body's attention to an email that I sent yesterday afternoon. I addressed it to a number of senators, including the OSB chairman and yourself, sir. It's an appropriation comparative. Could you ensure that all the senators have hard copies of that or copies of that before we begin?
Okay, let me check with Mr. Byrne. Steve, do you have a copy of whatever was sent? What is that? That is his budget appropriation he's requesting? The governor's request? Okay, are you referring to the comparison of our budget and what the governor's office is recommending, Lester?
Yes, sir, and also agency by agency allocation of the revenues to each individual department and agency.
Do you have a copy?
Mr. Chair, if I may request that we add those documents onto the Google Drive.
Oh, yes, and that's
that
what I'm
it'll be
looking
easier
for,
for us.
Madam Vice.
Thank you.
I just wanted to make sure that whatever Lester's talking about, I think, Mr. Byrne, you have a copy of it? Do you have that on file that we can share with everybody? That's the key. Okay. Okay, why don't we take a quick recess because we're having a conversation. We're moving along, okay? We're on recess at this point.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Committee of the Whole is back in order, turn from recess. My colleagues, the item that we were discussing is in your shared file under appropriation comparative, BBMR amended. I hope you all can open it up. We did send to the printer, have it printed, but they haven't promised printing the document. But what we're going to do, because Steve knows exactly what BBMR was requesting, or the governor's office was requesting. He will go by page and identify each line, which amount they're referring to. Okay? I hope everybody understands that. We know exactly what they were asking for. I beg your pardon? Turn on your mic so we can hear you. They're printing it. It's just that the printer's jamming right now, so that's the only problem we're dealing with. But it is on your file. It's in your computer. It just may be hard to see. Yeah, it's tiny. Huh? Senator Tello? Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Chair, when you explained to us that OFB is going to be able to tell us verbatim what BBMR, the difference, the
Yes.
variance between the two. So, Mr. Chair, I know that the administration had come to OFB with a figure on their own, which is, which they want it to be at, was it 784? Was it correct?
Yes, it's rounded up to
781.
775.
Okay. That being said, Mr. Chair, this printout that they sent to us, okay, so is this their revised budget, their revised executive budget?
Number one. By the time we got this, our budget bill was already created.
Okay, that's
Let's be
good to know,
reminded.
Mr. Chair.
I just want to make sure that we're all reminded that since March, I've asked for a realignment, I asked for a revised budget, all the way down to the last 2 days. As we were working this, everything was 774, and then the last 3 days before, even the speaker was calling me, and you were calling, where's our budget? These documents started to show. I can't, no one can work that way. And I'm not going to fault anybody, but there was always commotion about the differences. But today, you do have our budget, the substitute budget. We do have a copy of their recommended change in our budget. If this body chooses to adopt it, then it changes the budget.
Right.
It becomes a revised budget.
But Mr. Chair, my question was, at the very last minute yesterday, they decide to give you, OFB, a whole revised executive budget just yesterday? This is like, from the executive budget they presented to us, right, back in, February, January. And now they've provided us a printout of basically their revised budget. And it wasn't until just yesterday that I received this. So it kind of makes it, why wait to the last, I guess it's just a comment, just for the listening audience to realize that what we have to go through, pulling teeth and getting information from the administration, and then giving us this, when we requested a revised budget ever since, because we know the pandemic and the crisis that are in front of us, that they do it as on the day before or the day that we're going into session is beyond me. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Steve, would you like to comment?
Senator,
I didn't ask a question, Mr. Chair, I did not ask a question of Lester Carlson, okay? I'm just making a comment.
Senator, may I just go ahead
I'm
and
asking to be
interject something? Is that
recognized.
the 781 figure that the administration is submitting is a figure that we've been working with over the last several days.
Right.
Although the ceiling of 775 was the agreed amount to work with, They have since changed and asked for an increase in the general fund of approximately $7 million and an increase also in the special funds of about 1.89. So that's why if you look at the spreadsheet that you have today, it does reflect those increases. But this, I believe, would be, you can consider the official transmission to the body or even to OFB of these numbers. But in all fairness, we have been working with them on the numbers.
You have been working with them, but this body has not. So we didn't get any of this until yesterday. And with regards to the numbers that you're working, I understand you have been working with the administration on the projected revenues. But my question is, this is per agency. This is a revised executive budget that, to me, is what they want to see how much the Office of Veterans Affairs gets, how much revenue tax, how much civil service. And I'm seeing all these red numbers in parentheses, which looks like this is what they want to be put together. And for us to just get this yesterday? Actually, I got this yesterday and had it printed out.
That being stated, my colleagues, it was provided to you at 2 o'clock. We have their recommended budget amount that they're asking the legislature to consider, our body to consider. That being that you have it in your hands, okay? When we got it, how we got it, is irrelevant today. We're already now at Bill number 282-35 LS as substituted. You do have in your hands a recommended amount difference from the administration. If this body chooses to adopt it as we move along the pages, we'll now go to page 2, because the page 1 is just the title. We'll go to page 2, and the OFB director, Steve Guerrero, will tell you or advise you on each line what are the difference. And if this body chooses to adopt it, then so be it. We move on from there. Okay, I understand the delay. Senator Lee.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I share some of the concerns that were expressed previously, but I would like to give Mr. Carlson an opportunity. I think he was trying to share additional information with the body. And I think at this juncture and always, we should be open to hearing feedback especially from BBMR with regard to the budget. So, sure, Mr. Carlson, if there was something that you wanted to contribute?
Yeah, Lester, would you like to contribute
Yes,
to
thank
the...
you. Yes, thank you very much, both of you. All I wanted to say, and Steve said it, thank you, Steve. If you look at the revenue projections that we provided yesterday, it's got a comparison of all the different general fund, special fund, and federal matching grants and aids. It's a 2-page document. You'll see the iteration of BBMR's revised budget and OFB's revised budget, both in June 15th and June 19th. Then another OFB and BBMR back and forth. So the idea was that we were going to work together to come up with a budget that both the administration and the chairman's office was comfortable presenting to the body. There wasn't anything but a mutual agreement to work together. And as you can tell from the revenue numbers, we only have 3 revenue categories where we differ. I think that says a lot about the time and effort that we spent to provide a document to the body so that we could stand behind it. Now, there are some revenue differences that we'll go through, and then there are allocation differences that we'd love to be able to make sure that is in front of the body. This is all an effort to be, mutually cooperative. So that's all I'd like to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Lester. So, my colleagues, I will have Steve go through Are we in agreement with page 1, so at least we can close page 1 and move on? Okay, no objection. Page 1 is closed. We're now on page 2. I'll have the Director of OEB now go line by line and tell and advise you of the difference. Okay? So once everybody agrees to that, please, my colleagues, understand that once we complete chapter 1, we're moving forward to agencies. So once we all commit to chapter 1, that's the budget line we're going to be discussing. All right, Steve, if you can commence from line 1 and just work your way down, wherever the changes are at.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We were already, only from page 2, if you notice that the total general fund revenues is about $774,697,305. That is the number that we are recommending and we are proposing for the general fund revenues for FY 2021. It's in the bill. Go into the bill. You refer to the bill, and it's the first numeric number on the right-hand column. That is the total revenues, general fund revenues, that we are recommending, we are projecting for FY 2021. How we get to that number is the details on the bottom, but that is the total amount of general fund revenues. The general fund recommendation right now for the administration is they want to increase it by $7 million. So it would go up to $781,697,305. So they're asking for a $7 million increase over the $774 figure that we are recommending. Okay, the next one is the total number of tax refund payments that we set aside automatically, which is in the amount of $125 million. Third numeric line is the total general fund revenues available for operation. So after you subtract the tax refund, you'll come up to $649,697,305.
Mr. Chair, just when can we ask questions as we move along, or are we going to clear out a section and then open it up for questioning?
Do my colleagues want to ask question per line? Okay, so we'll begin question and we'll start from the back and we'll work our way forward. Senator Clint Rizzo, do you have any question on line 1 or line 2 as we're moving along? None? Madam Vice, do you have any question for line 1 or line 2?
I think it would be line 2 and line 3.
Okay, well,
The total general fund revenue and the provision for tax refund payments.
Okay.
Can you just explain to the public how do we get the provision for tax refund payments, the $125 million, and why it's the same as the previous year?
As mentioned earlier by both Lester and the Director of Administration, that $125 million is an estimate that is set aside every year. It has been the same figure for the last 4 or 5 years that we set aside for the tax refund payments. Whether or not it's sufficient, the administration seems, not just this administration, but at least the past administration for the last 4 or 5 years, seem that the amount is adequate to cover the tax refunds. Now, whether or not it's paid on time is a different story, but at least the total amount is similar. And although the last several years the actual amount, the actual payout has exceeded 125 to a tune of maybe 130, 135, even up as much as 140 million. But remember, we also have the child tax credit that we get reimbursed from the federal government that is also used to pay for the tax refunds.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, moving along, Senator Lee, do you have any questions for line 1, 2, or 3? Up to provision for tax refunds. Ma'am, do you have any questions?
Just a general question, Mr. Chair, and this one's for BBMR, if I may.
Okay, Lester, you're there?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Senator
Thank
Lee?
you. So, Mr. Carlson, based on our conversation so far, it seems like the administration and OFB, this is actually with respect to the entire page 2. So the administration and OFB are only about $7 million apart from the revenue projections. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And given that this sum is only about 0.73% difference, do you think that you'd be amenable to the legislature adopting a revenue that's $7 million under what you're attempting to advocate for? Or is this 0.73% difference going to be a specific reason for the governor to veto this bill? I just feel like at this time, Mr. Carlson, you know, and I appreciate all the information that you shared and your willingness to be here along with Director Byrne and Director Shimazu to come before us and to lay all this information out on the table. But if $7 million is where we're kind of finding ourselves, I just feel like maybe the most prudent thing for us to do would be to under-project, and then if everything works out in the way that we're all hoping that it does, and the way that you're describing it will, then we can come back to the table and spend that additional money rather than to over-project and have to come back and potentially, you know, have these doom and gloom scenarios. We don't want to have to lay off any employees or close any offices because our backs are up against the wall. But it just seems like at this time it might be the most prudent thing to do to adopt these, to under-project and adopt these more conservative revenue estimates. And so I just wanted to give you an opportunity to discuss that.
Thank you very much, Senator Lee. It in our opinion, because of the TAF revenue significantly cut, there are agencies like Department of Parks and Rec, and then the different cultural agencies that are funded with the Tourist Attraction Fund. The idea of increasing with merit, not to force balance anything. That's why we had the discussions earlier about where we are with certain revenue levels. We need general fund money to be able to fund the continued operations of agencies that were previously totally reliant on special funds, specifically the Tourist Attraction Fund. So the $7 million goes a long way to being able to appropriate a little bit of like Tourist Attraction Fund money and general fund money to keep the Commission on Tomorrow language without any general fund infusion. Their budget would get cut in half. The parts of the parks, Department of Parks and Recreation that are currently funded with the Tourist Attraction Fund would leave a big hole in their fund source, which needs to be filled with what we believe is a very justifiable ask with respect to $2 million in corporate and $5 million in withholding, because it does ensure we will have enough revenue to support the operations of the government. And I appreciate your don't mind the analogy, but when you buy you go conservative, like buy low, go sell high, that kind of thing. I know it's not the most appropriate thing, but that's what comes to mind. But there's also that mechanism wherein if we, like what happened in 2018, we did a report. It was a quarterly CRER, and the quarterly CRER is what triggers a fiscal realignment plan. And we knew that there was just no way that we were going to be able to make it through fiscal 18 without a fiscal realignment plan. So in statute, there is a mechanism to revisit the body when we think that not just the revenues received to date, but our projection for revenues would necessitate reconvening the legislature and introducing a fiscal realignment plan. So the fact that there isn't enough peanut butter to spread across the tourist attraction fund agencies is really why we're asking for the $7 million.
Thank you, Mr. Carlson. And, I tend to agree with some of the things that you were stating, but I also feel that these agencies won't be helped if the $7 million in additional revenue isn't realized at the end of the fiscal year. So I think, Mr. Chair, I don't have any additional questions on 1 and 2, but thank you, Mr. Carlson.
All right. Senator Torres, do you have any questions for line 1, 2, and 3?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, with the $7 million difference between what the governor's office is requesting and what the legislature has in its general revenue fund number, Lester, is the spreadsheet that you gave us of the comparative the reflective of the increases that are in your $7 million spread across the agencies, or is it, I'm just trying to understand this comparative that you showed us between substitute bill and BBMR's rebuttal. Is that the overlay of what the $7 million is across the agencies, or is there somewhere else that we should look specifically to where a $7 million increase would be applied? Am I clear? I hope that you understand my question.
Yes. The document that was the cause for the recess, what it is on, if you look at the very says grand total, and then the last two columns says OFB final and BBMR.
At the same time, Senator Torres, Steve, you want to respond to what you presented yesterday? That reflects the same thing.
Yes, Senator. The increase that the BBMR is asking for is on the bottom line. As far as the allocation and who gets the money, that's actually embedded in their spreadsheet. There's no one single department or agency or program that received the total $7 million increase. It was just added onto the baseline, and they just allocated it accordingly.
That's correct.
That's understood. I was just trying to, if we were to pick through and see where that is affected or who is most affected or least affected, but I guess that's a broad exercise. But no, thank you. I was just looking at this document and wondering if it would...
Senator Torres, if you go to the document, you'll see the far right numbers, FY2021 BBMR and S-Bill 282.
Yes.
You see that? Okay, so governor's office, you see in red, the difference between what we are suggesting and what OFB has in front of you for the governor's office is $55,000. So you can see the comparatives, and there's a lot of areas in which their levels and our levels agree, but where they don't agree, you'll see the variance column, and we try to make it reader friendly. So if you can just gravitate to those far right columns, you'll see in one shot, in one glance, the 774 number from the legislature as contained in the substitute bill and then the what amounts to $781 million in what you see as FY21 BBMR. I think it's mine is labeled rebuttal. I've asked that rebuttal be removed, but if that's how it was sent to you, then it's a rebuttal in the most polite way.
Actually, Lester, thank you very much, because it is very clear in your sheet, and that's what I was asking is if the snapshot is here, and thank you for that. I can see exactly where the variances are, and it is laid out quite
Yeah,
clearly.
so I think, yes, that's it. Yeah, so if we go through this exercise, you'll be able to see what the substitute bill has and what we're advocating, and you'll see where the differences are. And again, we're not that far off, but you can see how we try to make sure that everybody got pretty close to what they need, especially for basic operations, without cutting any vacancies. I mean, full-time positions, rather.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Thank you, Lester. Thank you, Senators. Any other, Senator Teller, you have any other questions? And does anybody
you.
else after
Yeah.
that on line 1, 2, and 3?
Thank you,
That's the
Mr.
only thing we're
Chair.
at on page 2.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And if I'm not mistaken, the variance between this $7 million is with the corporate tax of $2 million and the withholding interest and penalties at $5 million, giving a total of $7 million difference in these corporate tax versus withholding, correct? That's a 7 million.
Senator Tello, we're on line 1, 2, and 3. We're not
Okay.
breaking down line
Okay.
5, 6, 7, 8, 9. That's why I was asking
It was the difference, sir. What I'm trying to make a point is that it's the difference between what they're coming up with, $7 million more
Yes.
in those areas.
I understand.
Okay, I see what you're saying.
And
on
all
the-
I'm trying to do is, if my colleagues could bear with us,
Okay.
let OFB go through that whole sheet, and then everybody can ask all the questions about the whole sheet, because as I do line 1, 2, and 3, it doesn't really mean much. But if I do the whole sheet, exactly what you're doing, Senator
Okay,
Tello,
no, that's fine.
perfect.
Let's go ahead. If you want to do the whole sheet, that's fine with me to go through it, and then we can talk. I have no problem
There
with
you go, and
that.
that'll be easier. Does anyone else have any objection other than Senator Moylan? Senator Moylan, do you have a statement to make in reference to that?
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Be fast. I appreciate all the information and our discussion earlier about the total general fund revenue. I know there's a difference, as stated by BBMR and OFB, of the difference of $7 million. But I also feel, based on our earlier discussion, that this body does have a lot of questions and is concerned about the total revenue fund that we are basing this on. I personally would think it should be a lower amount than $774,697,305. In addition to that, we've had other questions regarding the provision for tax refund payments, of it being for the past so many years, so many administrations at $125 million. Knowing that this amount is lesser than what has been paid out previously, and we understand that, and it being pointed out to me that the child tax credit would cover, but I personally feel that the provision of tax refund payment should be the amount that we know it to be, and so that amount should be higher as well. So overall, with my understanding of the total general revenue fund, it should be lower, and the provisions for tax refund payments should be higher. Therefore, the total general fund revenue available for operations, I had to disagree with. So my statement is I just disagree with these numbers as introduced on lines 1 through 5. Not making any changes to the budget. I just want to say I disagree. Thank you, Mr.
Okay, thank you. Any other statement to line 1, 2, and 3? Otherwise, we're going to go to the whole sheet. Senator Will.
Mr. Chairman, I support
Wait.
your recommendation. I'm sorry.
Okay, no, go ahead, Senator
I
Will.
just can't have a conversation about 774 until we get to line 5. That's where my problems
and
are. So I
that's-
agree with your new method. I think it makes perfect sense.
Okay,
I don't know how we can discuss 774 when we're not even on the baseline numbers of 649.
all right, thank you. So my colleagues, Steve will go through the whole sheet, then you can just it's only going to identify the amounts, Then we can start with a question for the whole page, not line for line. It'll be line 1 to 27. Then we'll go to the next page and we'll go over all the lines. All right? Steve, start again from the beginning, but this time don't stop until you're down to until line 27. Thank you, Steve. Based on what we have in our budget. Okay? Thank you. Hit it out of the park.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to let you know, the numbers that I'll be citing off on this page are exactly the same numbers that were posted on earlier in my presentation when we first started this, when I was discussing how the revenues were, what the revenues would be for 2021. So I'll just go through it again real quickly, but if you remember, these are the same numbers that I referenced up on the screen yesterday. Okay, we'll go to line 6, which is the taxes. The first tax there is income tax. Of course, income tax comprises of 3 different sections. The first one would be corporate, where we are estimating to receive about I'll be exact, 85,402,002. The next category, which is individual, we are projecting a total of 71,975,270. The next category, which is withholding taxes, which includes interest, penalties, at 230,533,587. Then from these totals, you subtract the total tax provision of $125 million. That will leave a balance for total income taxes at $262,910,859. Okay? No. Next category is the business privilege tax, which, as everybody knows, is the old form of gross receipts tax. We are estimating at $304,439,500. We break down the privilege tax just to understand. We don't break it down, but I broke it down for you to understand what is taken off from the total that needs to be reserved right off the bat, which is not available for any appropriation until such time these obligations are set forth. The first one is the GMH Pharmaceutical Fund. By law, whatever the total business privilege tax is, you need to subtract 6.19% of that total, which is reserved specifically for the Pharmaceutical Fund for GMH. That amounts to $18,844,806. We also subtract $250,000 as the tax credit for the Rehabilitation Improvement Industrial Park Roadway pursuant to Public Law 33191. Then the final one is it's a category of other tax. We anticipate to collect $4.986064. So the total business privilege tax we hope to generate less we call it reserves is $290,330,767. You combine the total privilege tax with the total income tax, you get a sum of $553,241,626. That comprises basically mostly of all the general fund. Then we move on to line 21, which is federal sources. This is where we reflect how much we estimate to generate out of Section 30 for the year, and we estimate a total amount of $68,603,100. On top of that, we also get immigration and passport fees in the amount of $1.606706, for a total of federal sources of $70,202,900. $209,806. The next category in line 25 is the use of money and property. We generate approximately about 1 million, well, we anticipate to generate 1,044,912. Another category that we anticipate to generate revenues from is the license and fees permit. That amounts to about $4,905,479.
My colleagues, we've completed page 2. Looking from the rear, quickly moving across. Do we have any questions? Because I know there are some questions on reserve right now, Senator Will. Senator Clint, Madam Vice, on page 2, none. Senator Lee, none. Senator Torres, page 2.
I just want to ask, are you sure? I mean, given the BPT is tied into a lot of times the tourism numbers and all that, I mean, you're confident about this, Steve?
I am confident, Senator, to the degree that I think it is possible that we can reach this level. When we did the analysis, we did statistical models, we threw everything into the mix. We came up with a little bit lower number, but again, like we do all revenue categories, we kind of estimate what we also anticipate could happen, aside from what actual numbers tell us. And you know, you can go down the lines of, you know, economic conditions, economic factors, federal assistance. If we get another round of stimulus, this will definitely improve the collection of BBT, because, you know, you will have more disposable income. People will still be out there purchasing goods and commodities, which, you know, which the bottom line you'll see in the BBT.
I guess at this point, we just have to rely on best assumptions, but, you know, it all is really tied into the withholding, the BPT, corporate taxes. It's all about whether tourism is strong, whether, you know, jobs are generated and sustained. And, you know, with the pool coming to an end, I guess that's it. But then again, there's, like you said, there's a likelihood that more federal dollars can come, and that will be the stabilizer. And I think that's pretty much all we can rely on at this point, is what we're all, I think, reaching a consensus. So I just brought it up because it's very difficult to get over that concern. But I thank you, though, for doing the risk assessment and understanding what what it is that we really have to decide. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you. Senator Tello, do you have any questions
Thank you, Mr.
for
Chair.
page 2?
Yes, sir, thank you so much. You know, on page 2, when it goes to individual tax, I've noticed that there's been on individual, that's line 9, I've noticed that there's been an increase, a difference in FY20 that we're experienced, that we appropriated at 1.370901 is the difference between FY20 appropriations and what you have today, which is 71,975,270. That's an increase of 1.370910 from last year. You know, seriously, I don't really see much of an increase in anything for FY 2021. Steve, do you see that? If you looked at FY 2020 for individual tax,
Yes.
in the budget bill this current fiscal year,
Yes.
you'll notice that it's up almost 73. I mean, but this one here, you've estimated to increase from 2020 for FY21, 1.370910. Why is that?
Okay, the current budget level for individual is 70.6.
Right. And then this year,
And
for
this year,
21,
we're going at 71.5.
That's an increase of 1.3.
Yes.
Why are you assuming that it's going to be an increase when everything else from corporate to withholding income taxes is lower?
Because the tracking today, Senator, we are almost tracking $79.9 million.
And have you taken into the PUA that will end in December of this year? I know that we're going to be bleeding in from October to December, still having,
And that's why there is a decrease. Instead of taking the 79 million that we're tracking, we brought it back down to 71.9. So
But
we
what I'm
are
saying
already
in-
making the deduction, the adjustment as we go forward.
But in 2020, you had a less amount than this individual tax in the 2020.
Yeah, okay.
So
if
it's
you
an
read-
increase, is what I'm trying to say. Where do you attribute this increase to when all the other taxes are going down?
And those are one of the, the areas, like I said, that it's very hard to predict. You would think that with what's going on and everything, people would not be filing tax or not be getting withholding. But it shows that the tracking is way above what we budgeted. So if you look at OLP tracking, it's showing 79.8, almost 79.9 million. So when we go forward, we knowing, taking those concerns into play, we didn't keep a straight line. We reduced it, because of the same concerns you have is the same concerns we have, so we reduced it back down. Although it's still higher than 2020, it's still lower than what we're actually tracking by almost
You mean it's,
$8 million.
if it was lower in 2020, and you're increasing it by 1.3 for
Yeah.
individual tax?
Okay,
So
remember,
you're saying that
but Senator, remember
because of the
law,
tracking now that
current-
you're assessing?
But the current law right now is a budgeted number, is a number that we estimate to achieve. That number may change, and it normally you can tell whether or not we're tracking to meet that number as the months go by. So we are already in the 10th month of the fiscal year, and we are tracking almost 9 million above. So that 70 million that you're looking at, it's a starting point. But if you want to see where you want to be in the next month, 6 months, 1 year, you use the tracking. You can only use the 70 million as a starting point to compare. But for purposes of projecting forward, you would want to use real data. And the real data says if you're tracking 9 million above what the budgeted amount says, then you have to take things into account. And what we did is that we realized, like you said, things next year it's not going to be the same as this year. We're not going to have the same collection. So we make the proper adjustments. So we adjusted it down almost by $8 million, although it's still 1.9 above current budget levels, but we're still above the actuals. So I can understand if we're below, that would be a concern, but since we're tracking above.
Well, okay,
little bit
I'm not going
different.
to linger on this. My point is, we have corporate tax, compared to FY 2020, the budget. Corporate tax has gone down, 343,590. Withholding tax has gone down, 15,761,837. But individual tax, based on our 2020 budget that was passed, there's been an increase of 1.370 increase. And that's my concern. We're going down on all the other taxes here except individual. And I heard what you're having to say, but you're looking at tracking from this year, it's very hard. And Steve, you and I spoke about this. Has anybody like Gary Hiles or Bradley from Bank of Guam or anybody in the economist area have come to give you, other than your tracking and data, what the forecast is for this coming 2021 fiscal year? And you said it's hard to get anybody to come to you to talk about it. They don't want to talk about it because they're not sure. Mm-hmm. So if we're following a format here by subtracting, this is the only one I have a concern with, the individual, because that's the only one that you don't have lower than the 2020 budget. Moving on, there was also another increase in use of money and property, line 25, from the FY 2020 budget, 523,012 increase. What is attributed to this increase in this section of use money and property? A lot of my numbers are comparable to the current budget, the FY 2020, so that's where I'm getting these numbers from.
Okay, on this particular one, Senator, again, like I told you, part of our method of projecting forward is, on some of them, if you look at the current budget amount, it's $521,900. If you look at what we're tracking, it's $848,000.
359, yes.
Yeah, so what we did is we looked at the tracking of this particular category, and it seems there's always, over the last 3-4 years, an upward movement in the fund itself. So when we take a look at what we're tracking as of, I believe, June, we still have 3 months, June, July, August, September. We still have like 4 more months to collect, which conceivably put us over the $1 million mark. Now, this use of money and property is one of those categories that is really not predicated on tourists or anything like that. These are fixed costs. These are costs that the government collects, really not really affected by, the whole environment and stuff like that.
Okay.
It's money's going to come in.
Okay.
So we know where it's going to collect. So we bumped it up to a level we felt that was comfortable and achievable based on historical data, trends, and tracking.
Okay, so it has nothing to do with this, okay, it's normal.
Absolutely,
Okay,
yes.
thank you, Mr. Chair. That's all the questions I have.
Thank you. Senator Moon, you have any questions on page 2? None. Senator Pino? None. Senator Amanda? None. Senator Sabina, you have a question for page 2?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm sorry. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So my question is about realignment of the budget. Realignment of the budget. So if we're looking at a 3% change, which number are we looking at to calculate that? Is it the 774 million, or is it what we're appropriating at 630? So what number are we basing off the realignment?
Okay, when we're looking at page 2, once there's no question, we move on to the next area, and we all approve and concur whatever the total amount for general fund, then we'll be able to take a look at where the money's at, and where the recommendation of any of my colleagues wants to move money around and shift it in what agencies, what the priority will be.
Yeah, my question is, so I guess my intuition is that the numbers might change come 2021, right? The revenue sources might change come 2021, considering the uncertainty of federal funding to help cushion, drops in our economy. So in regards to if we have to come back to the table, if there's a budget realignment, what number are we basing that off on?
I believe, Senator, the way the law reads is gross revenues.
Okay, so that would be the 960. Which number is that?
774 for the general fund.
Okay. The other question I have.
Mr. Chairman, you want me to give it a little bit more color?
I'm sorry, was
What was that,
Mr.
Lester?
Carlson responding?
Yes. May I make a comment?
Yes, please.
Yeah. So, Senator Paris, after the budget is adopted, the statute reads that when we provide the CRER and if the CRER at the end of a quarter, when we do the projection to the end of the year, you can reference page 3 of any of our CRERs. If we feel that revenues will be below 3% general fund revenues, Steve is correct, we then are required to submit a fiscal realignment plan. So it's not at the end of 1 month, it's at the end of any quarter, where after we've collected the revenues and then we do the projection, the likelihood of staying within 3% below the general fund adopted levels, then we don't need to do a fiscal realignment plan. But if, like in the case of 2018, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, the writing was on the wall. We were not going to be able to live within the budget that we adopted for fiscal 18. So therein was the actual real life example of how the legislature has to readjust spending. But it doesn't come into play, as the chairman was saying, until, first of all, after we have a budget that's adopted, and certainly sometime during the course of a fiscal year when it's very apparent to everybody that we got to go back in and revise the budget.
So the actual, so basically it's 774 million, that's what we're basing that calculation on. Okay, thank you. The other thing is...
If that's the amount that this body chooses to go with.
Sure, right.
Okay?
Where at this
Thank
point it is what's written in
Thank
the
you,
bill.
Mr. Chair.
All right.
At this point, it's what's written in the bill currently, right? Is that correct?
Well, if you remember, we identified the difference of what the administration is requesting, that the 774 should go up $7 million more. If, when we're done with the general fund and we vote on that, then that's the general fund amount, and then we'll go to the special funds, and we'll settle the two, and then we add them together, then we know what the total amount would be across the board.
Okay, got it.
Okay?
Got it, thanks. One more question.
Sure.
So the CARES or the federal grants that have been coming in, has any of that funding been used, has it been duplicated in this budget? Has there been any kind of analysis to see if the money coming in through the federal grants is actually supporting some of these things that are identified in this budget bill?
If you're talking about utilizing federal dollars to supplement or supplant the appropriations in this bill, the answer is no. If you're asking me if CARES money is assisting and helping continue the operation of the department, that is something that is not part of this budget, but it definitely can happen. And most likely it may happen simply because of the shortage of funds. But there is no CARES money in dollar amounts that is part of this budget.
Yeah, thank you. But the question is, was the money used from the federal grants to pay for things that we allocated or at least appropriated in this budget bill? So, for instance, like the ambulances, was that part of the, was that in the budget originally submitted, but then we ended up using the CARES funds to purchase that? So that's just an example. You know, have we gone through the items to see if some of these have been actually covered and taken care of by the federal funds? So I'm not asking whether we're appropriating federal funds, it's more whether the federal funds actually came in and paid for some of these items that we took into account or considered.
Senator, just bear in mind one of the provisions of the CARES Act is that you cannot use CARES Act money for items that have already been budgeted. So if it's budgeted in a department's budget, you cannot use CARES Act to go out and purchase those items and then and say that, you know, it's just prohibited. You can't do that. Now, in terms of you're asking if there's any federal money that is part of this budget, there is in the form of the federal matching grants and aids. There's a section there. It's on page 5. We'll get there, but that page, I believe, references about 6 or 7 agencies that utilize federal match monies as part of their operations. But it is not CARES money.
I believe, was Lester Carlson going to add to that? I think he was mentioning something.
Yes, Senator. Mr. Guerrero is correct. The guidelines from the Treasury stipulate very clearly that if an item was budgeted in the current budget, you can't use the CARES Act money for that. But your point was a good point. The 7 ambulances were purchased with federal money. BSP got a grant, a COVID-related grant, and in that grant was funds for 4 ambulances. Guam Fire Department also had some federal money. So that's a very good example of 2 agencies working together and augmenting the federal grants to be able to get 7 ambulances total. All that came from federal money.
Thank you. But yeah, really my question was, you know, the budget was submitted prior to COVID, right? And I'm just wondering if these items were actually asked for in the budget, and then, you know, we were able to address it through COVID. That's just my question, really, is, you know, is there some duplication that was not anticipated? And it's not that we're using federal funds to supplement the budget, it's just, it happened independently of each other. So that's a comment and a question, I guess. If we actually looked into that, has that been analyzed, considering the budget was submitted prior to COVID and CARES funds?
Actually,
Go ahead, Lester.
go ahead, Steve. Oh, okay. Well, no, we did analyze this, and I think Steve is his comments were very accurate. And very well representative of the Treasury guidelines for use of CARES money. I think at the end of the day, we've benefited to, you know, employees got hazardous pay that all came out of CARES Act money. It wasn't budgeted. The pandemic, of course, wasn't foreseen. Lots of money that was paid for PPEs. Was either directly purchased with federal dollars, or agencies are submitting reimbursement requests with supporting documents like receipts, so that their budget is mitigated, and the money that they paid from this year's budget is being reimbursed to them. It's an ongoing process to do that. But there really wasn't any money in the fire department's budget for anything other than their basic operational requirements, and certainly not enough money to buy fire trucks and ambulances in this year's budget. So we're very hopeful that some more of the allocation of CARES Act money is utilized for these shortfalls in our own revenue, with the mind that it has to have a valid COVID relationship. So I think everybody agrees ambulances have that very valid relationship.
Mrs. Masi, thank you.
Thank you. Senator Jim, do you have a question for page? Good. Senator Will, you're a good man, Jim. Because he's got all kinds of amendments. It's loaded. Senator Will, do you have a question for page 2?
Yeah, I do, Mr. Chairman. I have the details in front of me. Again, we covered the income tax and withholding taxes, and I just still can't reconcile how we're projecting an increase. So my question related to page 2, based on the statements made by the BBMR representative, is this: having looked at third quarter, April, May, June, and having heard the reference to the fiscal realignment plan as required in the statute, is the administration going on record, I mean, I'm looking for a succinct yes or no, to state that the revenues as adopted by the Annual Budget Act for third quarter is not 3% or more, therefore not requiring a fiscal realignment plan? Did I hear that correctly? Is that a yes or a no?
The answer
So again,
is no,
as
you
required
didn't
by
hear
the
it correctly.
statute, an FRP should be submitted to the legislature if 3% or more, I mean 3, 4, 5% less than the projected revenues are being reported in. So are we going on the record to say that
The requirement by law?
based on the CRER, right, that we didn't meet that threshold? So therefore, an FRP is not required for third quarter, having seen the third quarter results when taken against the approved annual budget for FY20.
Senator, if I
Yes,
understand, I mean, my memory serves me correct, the way the 3% applies is that if the revenues fall below 3% for 3 consecutive months in a quarter,
Right.
the administration is obligated to come up with the fiscal realignment plan that must be submitted to the legislature 30 days after the quarter. So if the 3% threshold is not met within any given quarter, then I would assume that the fiscal realignment plan would be in order.
Okay. My follow-up to that, Mr. Chairman, I'm looking at the statute here, and I don't see the word consecutive, meaning April, May, June, consecutively 3%, which would average 3%. So you're saying if
Three
there's
months, 3 months or 3% less in a quarter.
Yeah, but that's your understanding. Mr. Chairman, can I get your interpretation of the statute? Because it doesn't say consecutive months. So my understanding of that is if it's cumulative, if you took the average of the quarter projection and it's 3% or less, it requires a fiscal realignment plan. It's right here, subsection F of the statute.
Can I just clarify?
Yes, please.
When I reference consecutive, I'm saying 3 months because normally 3 months represents a quarter. And that's my reference using the word continuous. Because 3 consecutive months, because the law does reference quarter. So there's 3 months in a quarter, and it has to be 3 months.
I think
So,
I
I'm
got that
sorry,
part.
it's just
Are we okay with this? If not,
I
Senator
just want a
Gus-
yes or no. Are we
I-
required, no, I have a question. So are we
Okay.
required, yes or no, based on the third quarter projections of this fiscal year to submit a fiscal realignment plan, regardless of your interpretation? A yes or no would suffice for me, Mr. Chairman.
Yes or no? If it's 3 months and it happened to overlap a quarter?
No.
It's still 3 months.
I'm sorry, let me restate
I
my
just-
question
okay.
one more time for the record, because
right,
I do want to
please.
get into the law of averages here, because I'm
Okay.
still not convinced based on the numbers here. So
Somebody-
yes or no by you or any member of the administration, are you stating for the record for the third quarter of this fiscal year that we have not gone at 3% or more below the adopted revenue projections for the annual budget? You can interpret that any way you want.
No, I don't believe we have for 3 consecutive months.
Currently, right now, Senator, the average is 2%, not even 2%. But if we do hit the 3%, then by law, it's mandated that realignment has to go. If you're asking me whether or not they should do it, yes.
Okay, then you're right. Maybe I'm asking the wrong person. I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. Could a member of the administration go on the record to say that for the third quarter, by statute, based on your reading and submissions of the CRERs for the public record, that you are not required at this point in time, given the economic reality of what you saw, to submit a fiscal realignment plan? Is one due to the legislature? Is that a simple way to put it? Is a fiscal realignment plan for third quarter FY20 required for submission by the administration? I'd like the administration to go on record to answer that.
I'll ask Mr. Carlson. Could
Just
you
a yes or
answer
no.
that?
I don't need, just because I have a
All right,
couple of questions.
understood. Lester?
The answer is no, because the tracking was negative 1.62. It didn't exceed 3%.
So the answer was no. And my only concern there, Mr. Chairman, is I heard the word tracking. And I'm looking at the historical unaudited statements from the CRER, right, in terms of the revenues and other areas. But I'll take that because that's all I have. And I trust Lester's judgment at this point in time. He's gone in and he swore before the people of Guam. Mr. Chairman, I just want to say that I don't know which way. I mean, I'm looking at the last submission and this year's submission and the adjusted submission and your submission. And, I hate to beat this horse, but it's worth stating for the record that this March, April, May, June for withholding taxes and individual income taxes, it doesn't matter where you adjust the calendar. My calendar is set at March from the onset of the COVID-19's effect upon the economy and the shutting down of services and the constriction of revenues flowing into this economy. So if I was on that side and I was asked the question how I would project forward, I would look at my dashboard starting from March and trend that way. And every month I look at, I'm looking at a negative double digit, except for June, but you gave me the reason because of the infusion of stimulus monies, and I can accept that. But for me, it's a cautionary tale, because in the absence of stimulus monies or an industry that cannot rebound for 2 more years, tourism being the one that we cite all the time, I think there are darker days ahead. And for us to project the general fund revenues for appropriation at an amount higher than the last 2 fiscal years is not prudent. I just want to make that statement for the record, and I got my answer. It was no, and let's hope we're all wrong in that regard, but thank you.
Thank you,
Let's
Senator
hope I'm
Castro.
wrong. I'm sorry that I'm wrong in that regard.
Thank you, Senator Castro. Madam Speaker, do you have any questions for page 2?
Mr. Chair, I maybe just want to note for the record that based on the projections and based on what we're looking at today, that I'm going to say that based on the previous years, that the numbers that we're coming up today is maybe a good guesstimate, because we cannot foresee what's going to happen to us in this invisible war that we still have today, and that every day is going to be fluid for us, especially during this time. We know, as I stated earlier, that based on the executive orders coming down, we don't even know what that major effect's going to be. We may need to come back here. So I'm just saying that I want to put that out for the record, that at least the effort of OFB is trying to come to the projections based on what has happened with past history and what we need to do to have a working budget moving forward. But I want to say that as we look at being conservative, I mean, the numbers look good today because it is true. We do have 1.3 billion that's circulating in this economy, and maybe a little bit more. My question, as I stated earlier, is what's going to happen when everything stops? So just want to note that for the record.
Yes, Madam Speaker. Senator Kelly, do you have any questions?
Situus Masi, Mr. Chair. I just have a practical small question, just for some clarification. Can I get an explanation of what use of money and property is exactly?
Who are you asking? Are you asking the OFB or Mr. Byrne? Could you answer that, please?
Senator, the biggest part of that is interest that is received on cash on deposit in various places.
Okay.
So, and that's good because it helps me understand the previous question about how it went from 500,000 in the previous budget to now it's projected to be 1 million. And you were saying at OFB that it's something stable that can be predicted. So, Situus Masi for that clarification.
Thank you. No other questions? Thank you. Senator Therese, do you have any questions?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. If I could start towards the bottom on the section 30, so that's on line 22. So we're estimating 68,603 for FY21, and FY20 we estimated 71 million. What did we actually receive? Because you're tracking, you have a tracking number and it's like 69. It's below the 71. But what, we received that
Mr.
in
Ed?
September last year, or is this the number, of the 71 that was estimated for fiscal year 20? When was that received, or will that be received? Is that what was received in September of September?
You can see it on the CRER report.
Okay, sorry, where's that?
We receive, according to this, the cumulative revenues for this year are 69,928, 937.
Okay, and that's final, pretty much?
Yes.
Okay, so it was below what we had estimated in the 71, or?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. How much of the Section 30 of this of the 68 million that we're estimating for fiscal year 21 do we normally use for tax refunds? I know when you get the Section 30, you pay off a bulk.
Yes. Roughly 20 million gets taken off the top for the debt service. So there's usually around about 40 to 45 million that's available.
Okay, 40 million. All right. The reason I'm asking is because, yeah, we're currently looking at still due for 2019 refunds 80 million plus because of the corporate, but just wanted, and is this the money we're going to receive this September? September 2020?
The 68 million, yes.
Okay. And if we pay 40, we'll still have a $40 million, or whatever else you can pay in the next couple of weeks. That will still be the balance due for 2019 calendar year taxes.
Roughly.
Income taxes, yeah. All right. I'm asking because, and then if I could go back to the provision for tax refunds, it's 125, and I guess I was concerned because it's 125, yet, at this point, it's August, and we still have 80 million that we owe, 80 million plus. It's more than half. But you told me on the side, Director Shimizu, that you paid actually 141 in fiscal year 20 towards tax refunds, meaning 2019 and prior year tax refunds. So you're paying much more than 125 that's set aside.
Excuse me.
Sorry.
Senator, to clarify, for FY 2019, the gross refund amount was that 141.
Oh, sorry. How much have you paid during FY20 for tax refunds?
So for FY 2020, as of the end of July, we have it at about $67 million, not including any interest. So about 67 million, a little bit over.
Okay, yeah. So you've paid about 67. We owe 80 from what we know from the 2019 filings. 67 million. I'm just still trying to find a way that we can get these paid more promptly than we have in the past because of the circumstances that people are facing. And if we are not going to receive any additional federal stimulus money or, aid for them, then yeah, this is a way that we could, very much directly help them. So 67, all right. If I'd like to reserve to be able to come back to this tax provision if the provision for tax refund payments, we're also dealing with it on another page, Mr. Chair, so if I could just, if you allow us to also make changes to that if we make a change to the other pages. And I have another question. So this is, again, Steve, what my colleague was talking about earlier was that, so corporate income taxes were 85 million in FY20?
That's the amount that was budgeted, yes.
Right, and we are, and you're budgeting the same amount for FY21? Approximately, a little less.
Okay, based on the last CER for July, we
Yes.
are actually tracking, collecting $89 million.
Right, so you're saying tracking is great for the corporate taxes, but we have to
No,
remember.
not tracking, collected.
Collected, sorry,
Yes.
that's even better. Yes, so collected, yes, for calendar year 2019 corporate taxes. Yes, we have collected this year. We've collected that this year. But, you know, for business activity that took place pre-COVID, right? Mm-hmm. But I guess that's why I'm wanting you to explain one more time why we are, our post-COVID estimate of corporate taxes is the same as our pre-COVID estimate of corporation taxes.
Remember, the numbers that we're referring here are, one is budget numbers and the other one is real actual collection numbers. So if we already collected 89 million, which is above the budgeted numbers, mm-hmm. we also have 2 more months to go. Mm-hmm. So there is a good possibility that we can hit the 90, we can hit the $100 million mark. We don't know. See, and that's the scary thing about doing these things. If you look at the tracking, we're supposed to be tracking $85 million. But if we're 2 months out to the end of the fiscal year and we've already exceeded that, so that's a good indication that there is a chance that we can exceed way beyond what we actually budgeted and use that as a basis to go forward. We're not going to, if we collect 100 million, I'm definitely not going to budget 100 million, but I'll definitely look at it and say, well, maybe the 85 can go up to 87. There's a good chance. Okay. And that's how we sway things when we do the estimate.
What do you expect fiscal year 21 or the taxes that corporations are going to pay for calendar year 2020 to be anywhere near what they paid in calendar year 2019?
Absolutely not. And that's why I just made that statement. If we're already collecting...
It would be less, wouldn't it?
I would think so, yes. And that's why if you look at the increase is nominal. It's almost the same, like you mentioned. Mm-hmm. It's like steady. But if we're going to collect 90, 95, 100 million, I would like to think that I'm going to shave off 15, 20 million from that number. And like I said, although we do the best in tracking, we also try to be optimistic. I can't be pessimistic when I do this, because if I do pessimistic, we're never going to fund, we're not going to have enough to fund anything.
I think we've all agreed that in order to even accept these numbers, we're going to all be very optimistic, but yes. I'm trying not to be unrealistic
yes,
either, because
absolutely.
We're talking about corporation taxes. Now, absolutely. This is something that I'm hoping, I was hoping we could be just a little bit, more concrete. When you say you shaved off 15 million, I mean, where'd you get that number, for example? Or why 15 million? Why not more? Because we're talking about, I don't know, see, if we had some data as to how many businesses really have been impacted, but if you're talking about an entire industry closed, and I know my colleagues have said this earlier, an entire industry closed for looks like, at least 1 quarter, perhaps. Well, anyways, we're talking about closed for this year since March. That's more than a quarter. That's 2 quarters. I mean.
You're absolutely right,
yeah.
Senator. And like I said, if you look at a projection, it's almost status quo to this year, considering a couple of things. We may be able to generate 10, 15, 20 million above current projection levels, or we can go beyond. I mean, we can go below. So taking those things into consideration, I think the best thing, and the Bureau of Budget has the same position, is that if anything, stay status quo. I mean, I can shave off another 10 million just to shave it off. But, I mean, I don't know how to do that
I guess I'm just
without-
asking if we have anything more concrete to say that corporations during FY20, right now, what they're going through, how that will affect their taxes in the end, you know?
Well,
which
you
is
know,
in December.
I did a follow-up with Gary Hiles because
Mm-hmm.
like you said, you know, all of these things are fluid. It's always changing. And on Friday, I had a conversation with Gary. I said, Gary, give me an overview of what's going to happen at least in the next 30 days, 3 months, 12 months from now. And he's saying that, you know, growth in construction will continue, but not at a fast pace. He also said that although he recognizes tourism is dismal growth, there is an opportunity, there is a chance that when borders open, we don't know, that tourism may exceed the 400,000. He also said as far as H2 growth prediction for workers to come in. I mean, right now, I think the estimate that we're using is 1,600 permits, licenses to come in. That generates, I believe, our 3.2 amount that we're estimating for the manpower development. You know, Bureau budget is a little bit more optimistic. They're thinking like 2,000, you know, 2,300.
But that's based on H2 workers.
Yes, the actual cost of a license or permit to come in. So
Right.
those are a little bit more fixed. So those you can actually, you know, kind of get a more rounded figure, concrete figure, like you said. But when you have everything else that's fluid, then nothing is really dependent on anything. After you do your analysis, you throw in your best guess and see what would happen. And that's what economists do.
Sure, I understand that. And I thought we were throwing in our best guess at the $400,000 visitor arrival, that was optimistic.
That was from
compared to
GDP,
the
yeah.
200,000. And now you're saying you're being optimistic even above that they might even do better. And that's where I get worried, I guess, because, this is, because the corporation taxes that we are banking on for FY21 are what they're going through right now. It's their profits from this year where we have been shut down since March. Those are the businesses we're talking about, and that's the income we're talking about. We're not talking about, and especially between now and December, I think that's quite unrealistic that they would exceed, that many visitors before December, for sure. So I don't know. That's the number. The others, maybe we can be optimistic. But that one, I guess I don't know. I'm only gauging from, the businesses I'm talking to, and maybe I don't know. I wish, Daphne, do you have any input from businesses that, I don't know, can you do an analysis like that based on GRTs that they've pretty much stopped operating and how many businesses that affects?
Thank you, Senator. I know earlier Senator Perez did ask a question similar about business license data. One thing that we've done at DRT is we've actually pulled together our team members so that we can perhaps begin to put together, I suppose, some type of a think tank so that we can begin to look at really what the impact of this current coronavirus or public health emergency has on our community. The one area we wanted to look at was business licenses, and as I mentioned, I think it's a little bit challenging, although we need to continue to try to monitor those. It's a little bit challenging to really get a good gauge on where we are in terms of businesses canceling due to this current situation, just because we're still in the midst of it. We believe that it's going to be a good gauge going forward. Another thing that we've we're working on as well is to even though anecdotally, to begin to open up communications with our licensees as they come in to do registrations or as they come in to get licensed. Again, even though it's anecdotal kind of information, just so we have a feel. And my team, because really they're more the frontliners, they're the ones that deal with our licensees as they come in, whether it's in insurance, securities, banking, real estate, or regular business licenses. I think they have a good feel for that. And as well as weights and measures, we regulate taxi cabs, we regulate, of course, financial institutions, insurance companies. In some of our areas, again, when I've gone back to the team to ask them about the data,
we're not really like, for example, in insurance, securities, and banking, we didn't see a reduction in the number of licenses or certificates of authority. So we're looking at that data, but, that's not to say that those businesses are not impacted, right? Because again, we're just kind of looking at it from a licensing standpoint. Of course, the BPT is a good, a good gauge, but again, there were some things that went into effect, of course, when Governor announced the team plan back in March, which was the deferral, there was a deferral of BPT of the 2%, and that is, so for those businesses for the months of April, May, and June, some of them were just now beginning to pay back the deferral, or pay the deferred portion. Then, of course, there was the new law, which is, we had, of course, the limited exemption for certain small businesses, which is, I guess, the enhancement of the Dave Santos Act, which that happened last year. And then again, this year, there was another adjustment to that, which we're calling our, I guess, like Lex B 2.0, or the additional enhancement to the Dave Santos, which is also impacting our numbers. So it's a little bit difficult. We're still even, of course, having to communicate to the community about how to report the new the adjustment or the adjusted GRT. But to answer your question, Senator, the impact on our community is absolutely important to us. We believe that it's most especially because we're frontline. I believe that our team can have a good understanding, at least again anecdotally, on what is going on in the community. So we've put together, I guess, a group, and so then that way we can meet regularly to discuss that, and to monitor things like cancellations, and to be able to get data on whether there's a cancellation, what's the reason. Historically, we don't get a reason if there's a cancellation. Moving forward, we've started that. But again, it's a little bit challenging, ma'am, again, being just kind of in the midst of it. And I think, of course, hindsight's always 20/20. I know when we look back at our numbers in this past year, year over year, we'll be able to see what happened, but it's a little bit difficult to put the numbers together going forward, or to connect the dots going forward. But we are doing our best to do an assessment. And I don't know if perhaps maybe Gita, may be able to weigh in a little bit more on what they're seeing on the economic side.
All right. I was going to ask if the business privilege taxes that you've estimated here also incorporated the reduced business privilege taxes for the, according to the new law for small businesses. Is that incorporated already? That's been reduced? Okay, and then I guess, I'm not the economist, but I'm going to tell you, we're facing business privilege tax reduction for sure, right? And yes, that's, I don't know. I can't see how we don't face similar, corporate tax reductions. But what, in the list of tax credits, there's only one here. Is there a reason the others are not listed? They're all incorporated. You just take that off the top, or where are the other tax credits?
Senator, this is the only one that we take off the top that I am aware of. There may be other mandates, So this particular, every time we set aside this 250,000, it's set by law. We take it off the top. The other ones are all basically done by fund source. So if they're required to be paid, we normally go to the specific fund sources and tap those for payment. But this one we do it automatically because it's mandated by law.
All right. So have you adjusted your BPT to include tax credits that we've been recognizing in prior years?
We try to do our best with what information we have. We don't have all the information for all those entities and businesses that are granted or have tax credits. So whatever information we get is what's incorporated here. whether or not it's 100% complete and it tallies all the tax credits, I can safely say it doesn't, not at this point.
Okay. All right. Mr. Chair, if I could get your permission to come back to the provision with it. Thank you.
Yes. Senator Lee, I saw your hand up. You had one question in page 2. And if any of my other colleagues, and then Senator Tello, just a follow-up for page 2. So we can kind of close page 2 and we can move on. Senator Lee.
Sudos Masi, Mr. Chair, and I think following on from Senator Terlahi's line of questioning with regard to the corporate income taxes, I just had some clarifications that I think are important for the body to understand. So if I could just reconfirm that the corporate income taxes paid last month, based on the draft CRER or the collection snapshot that we received from BBMR, these are based on income that was received or income made by businesses last year. Is that correct? So if, in other words, I'm not paying corporate income taxes in July of 2020 calculated against income that I made in June 2020, which is kind of the process that we understand for BPT. It's on income that I made from last year. Is that correct? Mr. Guerrero?
Can I ask Daphne to answer that question,
And
please?
yeah, I'm asking because if the taxes paid last month were based on the level of consumer spending last year, then it might not be the smartest idea for us to base next year's corporate income tax projection on what's happening this year, given that we know that businesses are making less money versus last year, this year versus last year, and perhaps, yeah, Ms. Shimizu, this can be answered by you. Are you seeing any, or being given any evidence to the contrary? Are you, I guess, the level of taxable corporate income being booked this year is higher than what was being booked last year, based on that July collection snapshot. It's $28.1 million above what was projected for corporate income taxes in the current budget. So I just want to be very clear about what we're doing here, that these corporate income taxes are being collected on income that was made from last year, not last month.
Okay, thank you, Senator Lee, for that question. And regarding the corporate income taxes that are received, they're a combination of, could be corporate estimated taxes for the current year, and then also, of course, payments on income tax for income that's earned, of course, in the prior year, or it could be a prior taxable year. The taxable year could be a fiscal year, it could be the calendar year, depending on the taxpayer. So it's a combination of both the income taxes that are received as estimated income taxes, because if you have an income tax liability over a certain amount, I believe it's $1,000, you have to pay in. Otherwise, if you don't pay in through the year, you end up having to pay a penalty. And so there are some companies that will have to be paying in, of course, as we go along, and on each quarter. It just so happened that on the amount that would be due in April, of course, the extended due date for those payments was July. So there is a portion of the payments that were due, or that came in July, that were actually estimated income tax payments. And I have an estimated amount, but I perhaps it's around maybe 30% or something, and I will have to kind of gather that data more, but I'm thinking that maybe it's about 30% of the amount that was received, a little bit less perhaps, that is for estimated income taxes for this year, as opposed to payments that were due for taxes. Also, it's important to keep in mind that the due date for filing, the extended due date is October, right? So even though we would normally see like an April, and then which was moved to July, there is an extended due date which is October, and there still will be some payments that may come in October. There's I know we're talking about corporations, but whether corporations or individuals, there's a requirement that you pay in, otherwise you end up having to pay estimated or a penalty for underpayment of taxes. But it's still possible that there are some people who, a lot of times what happens is the more complicated returns that people file when they get to October, because they may not have all of the documents. They may have a K-1. Sometimes they will have to have the audit for their company done, and the audit takes until June, July. Even sometimes when they file their return in October, which is the extended due date, they still don't have it all. So they file the best that they can with the information that they have. So to answer your question, yes, there is a portion of the corporate taxes that's estimated, and that's pretty standard. I think it's not something that's unusual for this year as opposed to prior years.
So for example, let's say I pay my corporate income taxes based on the estimated amount and I overpay. Does DRT send that money back or hold on to it for the next year, or what's your process?
Well, every taxpayer has on their tax return, they make the election themselves. If you look at whether it's your individual or your corporate return, there's a section which indicates whether or not you want it to be applied or to be refunded. That's up to the taxpayer. That's not something that we can dictate.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Senator Tello, you have a follow-up question for page 2?
Thank you. Yes, I do, Mr. Chair. And I'd like to express my, it's perfect question to ask. I was thinking about that the other day about corporate tax. My previous colleague making that question. It's true. A lot of these corporate taxes are paid from the prior years, and I'm glad she brought that up. The question, just tagging on to also Senator Terlahi's question with regards to the amount of businesses that Daphne, you mentioned earlier that license and fees are still, people are still coming up again, getting business license, but can Department of Revenue and Taxation also give a gauge of how many licenses have been canceled or they've closed out businesses for just in the last, I guess, 3 months, or just for the year of 2020 from January till now? Can you do a number? And by the way, you get some businesses who have 2 locations. They still keep their business license, but they close one area, like example, Shirley's. They have 3 locations and they closed one. Is there a way that Rev and Tax can determine that?
Yes, they do. Each license is by location.
Okay.
You could have the same name, but you have by location. They're not 1 equals 3 parts.
So in the last, from the beginning of January until today, how many businesses have closed down? Can you tell?
As I mentioned earlier, it is possible for us to provide that information in terms of how many licenses have been canceled, how many are new, how many are renewed. As I mentioned, though, there's sometimes, there are going to be cases where businesses still have an active business license but have not canceled. And it's difficult to tell just from looking at that number, although we're working to develop our own tracking on that. Again, what I mentioned as well is historically we have not captured the data on the reason for a cancellation. So I've been meeting with our team internally. We've employed a new process where now as people are canceling their licenses, we're gathering the data as to the reason so that we can have some gauge on what the impact of this current public health emergency is on our businesses, at least from that perspective.
But we don't have a number right now, Daph?
I don't have that number with me, ma'am, but we can work to get that to you. I know that's important. So our team actually over the last several weeks have been kind of trying to look to figure out how we can extract that data properly from our system, and so we'll work to try to get that to you.
Okay. Thank you, Daphne. That's all, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. My colleagues, we're going to take a 10-minute recess. Committee of the Whole has returned from recess. My colleagues, we are now on page 3. Where's Steve? Senator Therese, you have a follow-up question from page 2? Okay, you have one. Okay, I'm going to count it.
So just wanted to check. So we were told that the 400,000 visitor arrival estimate would mean a 75% decrease from their, their normal visitor arrival estimates, about 1.6 million. And so 75% decrease in visitor arrivals, I would think, equates to 75% decrease in visitor industry businesses. But I guess I just wanted to ask one more time if Daphne or Mr. Byrne or Mr. Guerrero have anything that shows that impact, what we're currently going through.
Steve, do you have an impact based on page 2 as a result of the GVB's, the TAF? That's basically what Senator is asking about. The impact of the 75% decrease, does it show it all here?
No, I mean, did you incorporate the 75% decrease in tourism arrivals in corporate taxes, not just TAF, but corporate taxes? And yeah, primarily that one. It's what I'm concerned about.
What I can say, Senator, is that the effects of the decrease in tourist arrivals from Guam doesn't necessarily just only affect the TAF, but it has a broad effect on all revenue categories throughout the government of Guam. And we would like to think that whatever levels we set forth, whether it be in the income tax or corporate, whether it be in business, PBT, or anything else, that we factor some of those conditions into our numbers. And hopefully, it would develop, and it would develop into projections that we feel that is realistic and achievable.
On the BPT that we are receiving right now, so on for example, the July BPT, we've given we've closed some businesses, that are not allowed to operate, some businesses, or we've only allowed them to operate at 50%. And then we've also given a break in the BPT to certain small businesses. And so the tracking on the BPT, let me just pull it up again, is the year-to-date adopted versus year-to-date actual is -1. And so you've incorporated in June, they had projected a -3 million for BPT, right? So you went down about 4. I mean, your number's 304. I guess I'm just asking how. That's more than. How did you get this 304 number?
What we did, Senator, is we used historic data going back, I believe, to 2019 on this particular one, and using the data, actually we came up with a lower number than the 304. But then again, we're thinking that, we gave a little leeway in the event that, the economy does grow, tourism happens to exceed the projected numbers. We felt that, if anything right now, being less just by 10 million from the current budget level would be something that we felt that, it's achievable. Whether or not how far we're going to be off, I can't tell you. But I think it's a realistic number that we can attain based on the data that we have.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Ruiz. My colleagues, we are now on page 3. We're almost at the end of the total general fund revenue. Steve, if you can continue on line 1 up to line 9, and let's settle the general fund revenue.
Okay, on line 1, we have license fees and permits, which is the Better Public Service Fund. We take out, we subtract $490,548. What this represents basically is by law that we need to take 10% and set aside all fees collected under the license fee permits, which was on the previous page at $4,905,479. So we took 10% of that and reserved it for the Better Public Service Fund. Line 2, if you add all the total licenses and fees, it comes up to a total of $4,414,931. Item E is departmental charges. We hope to we project $1,200,678 for total general fund revenues of $630,111,951. Of that amount, okay, again by law, we set aside the 2%, which is reserved for the deficit reduction rainy day fund. If you take 2% of the total of $630 million, you'll come out to an amount of $12,602,239. Now, this year, what we'd like to do, as we did this year, for 2021, what we'd like to do is also take the approach that because of the financial condition of the government of Guam, the uncertainty of our revenue base and stuff like that, we would also like to go ahead and utilize the upfront, the 2% rainy day reserve fund in the same amount, which was also provided for this year through a separate bill that allows the governor now to utilize that rainy day fund amount. Last year in 2019, the rainy day fund was not set aside. It was not part of the 2019 budget. Last year, it was incorporated into the budget. It was, I believe, an amount that we set aside. But we also, at the same time, authorized through legislation the release and the use of those funds. And we are asking, again, because of the current condition, the financial condition, that these monies be available to the administration for the use and allocation to continue the operation of the government of Guam.
Now, my colleagues, as Steve, the director, mentioned, $630 million. That's not counting the $7 million that the administration asked. So that's something, Steve, if you can just give the total amount, and then my colleagues can determine which one they would choose to support.
Yes. So if you notice on line 8, we are identifying the 2% set aside, which is the $12.6 million. But on line 10 also, on line 8, we're also line 6 is we identified the 2%. On line 8, we are also putting it back to be used for appropriation. So the bottom line total appropriation general fund available is $111,951. Or if the body does decide to go ahead and adjust this amount, you would add $7 million to the total, and that total would be $637,111,951. Okay? Moving on to item 11. Row 11.
No. No, I would like to ask the colleagues first, that we come to an agreement or a settlement on what the total general fund revenue would be. The reason for that, because once we move on to the next section, we're talking about special funds. Those are, when you combine the two, then you'll know the total package of the budget. But we need to settle one, because the first one identifies the recommendation by the administration of additional 7, okay? Versus our budget is less 7. Speaker, you wanted to make a comment?
Yes, Mr. Chair, if I may, just based on that statement that is presented by you and the Executive Director of OOP, I ask that we at least take some time to, it's already 10 till 5, and I just want to be able to see if I can talk to my colleagues, and you can, if you don't want to take a break for it till tomorrow, we can just a couple of minutes. Okay.
That being stated, we will recess until 10 tomorrow morning. Thank you.